You know, it is one of the more frightening things to see a group of people here in America that for years and years have talked about the vile, filthy way the big bankers, the Rothschilds, the Bilderbergers have absolutely destroyed the wealth of this country, keeping it for themselves. And then when a country finally stands up, like it had actually a couple of different times in history, and says enough is enough, we're not going to sell the wealth of our people out to big U.S. oil interests. We're not going to let the bankers come in and take us out like they have everybody else. We're not going to let them come in and put us in chains like they have every other country. These big bankers, with their allies in the mainstream media, cook up a story that everybody just loves to hear about. Oh, how socialism in this and socialism in that and communism in this. And it's ridiculous. This country, Venezuela, going back about as far as you can in modern history, was never anything but socialist, and at one time was quite wealthy, doing very, very well. It was called the Saudi Arabia of South America. Largest oil reserves in the world. Major exporter of aluminum. Put together aid packages for other Latin American countries at one time. But the problem that the big U.S. bankers saw is that they did not allow big U.S. corporations to come in and suck them dry. And so that's why the war against them had to start. And they've tried it multiple times. You know, this is a really great article. This is a Prepare for Change. It talks about here about how they've arrested these bankers for doing this exact thing. And then he talks about Andrew Jackson, who tried to do this a long time ago, calling them a den of vipers and thieves. Fractional reserve banking, which is illegal in Venezuela. You know, and mentioning this cryptocurrency, it's backed by a barrel of oil. Now, I want you folks to think about something. That cryptocurrency, that crypto token, is worth 1 barrel of oil. Now, imagine if that $1 you have in your wallet over there, or in your purse, would always now and forevermore be worth 1 loaf of bread. No matter what happened in the markets, that dollar was worth that tangible good, that thing. It would bypass the fractional reserve banking system. It would bypass the fluctuations in currency values. This is what Goldman Sachs can't have. And this paragraph here, the first thing you need to know about Goldman Sachs is that it's everywhere. The world's most powerful investment bank is a great vampire squid wrapped around the face of humanity, relentlessly jamming its blood funnel into anything that smells like money. Absolutely true. In fact, the history of recent financial crisis, which doubles as a history of the rapid decline and fall of the suddenly swindled dry American empire, reads like a who's who of Goldman Sachs graduates. Really? You meaning like our Secretary of Treasury? The one that decided, hey, all of you people out there, it's now illegal for you to invest in Venezuela. It's a terrible idea. Don't do it or we'll put you in jail. And we'll put you in jail if you buy the crypto token, the Petro token. Oh, but by the way, we're going to go ahead and we're going to loan them some money so that we can start getting 50% yield bond payments back. Do you see what's happening? I want to play something for you. It's a really great video on YouTube that talks about the history of Venezuela. And I'm just going to play a small excerpt here. This goes back to the 80s when they tried to bow the knee to the big banks.
Instead of addressing any of these problems, the strategy of the government is instead to borrow money.
The debt becomes more difficult to pay. Under that environment, Acción Democrática loses the election of 1979, and you have to go more to a market economy.
Inflation begins to take off, corruption becomes an even more profound problem, and yet we have no effort made by any of the governments in the 1980s to actually address the overwhelming reliance on oil, which was falling in value.
Okay, what they're saying there is that the state-run socialist government, Acción Democrática, lost. Okay, and then a new government took over that was more what they would call, quote-unquote, U.S. friendly.
Successive governments of Acción Democrática and COPEI did little to check the economic decline, social inequality, and the corruption of a ruling class.
Okay, COPEI is the Christian Democratic Party. Basically, they're two what we would call leftists.
In December 1988, Carlos Andrés Pérez was re-elected to office, promising to bring back the cash-rich glory years of his first term. But rhetoric would be trumped by reality.
Once he is sworn into power, he tells the Venezuelan people, I already have negotiated and I'm going to the IMF.
Venezuela had to go to an agreement with the International Monetary Fund to...
You're saying there was no choice?
No choice at that time, because Venezuela was indebted. Venezuela had to go to some adjustment, structural adjustment, to launch the growth again.
The problem is, Greg, this IMF loan comes with some very difficult terms and conditions. You have a segment of the population that hasn't benefited from the boom times. Living conditions have been deteriorating through the 80s, and now comes this IMF loan, where yet again they're feeling the effects. Should Perez have anticipated this?
Well, yes, he should have, certainly, because it affected, again, the poor who had been already suffering. It affects them even more. But I would say, just one step back also in terms of, was there an alternative? I think we have to keep in mind, on the one hand, that at that time, the neoliberal kind of policy paradigm was absolutely hegemonic around the world. And so it certainly appeared that way, I think, that there was no alternative. I would argue from today's perspective, there probably were some alternatives. One of them would have been perhaps to actually default on the debt, which, of course, has all kinds of other consequences. One can talk about trying to, for example, tax the wealthy more, or some other way of raising revenues other than cutting back on the parts that have an impact on the poor.
What do you...
Okay, so basically what they were saying here is this is what was talked about when we had the 2008 crisis. Should we allow the government to bail out these corporations and become basically a socialist state, or should we let them fail and let them go through bankruptcies and let them come out the other side like a market economy would? And what happened is when they took this IMF loan basically gave the IMF the ability to say, okay, Venezuelan government, you can spend money on this, but not that. You can you start this program, but that program you can't. All of this. And it caused all sorts of nightmares in Venezuela.
Say to that, Carlos? People were still suffering in terms of unemployment and wages.
Yeah, because when you change, when you have to... The idea in the second Carlos Andrés Pérez government was that the country couldn't be resorting on oil resources, couldn't be depending on the state resources. They had to promote private entrepreneurship. They have to promote the participation of a business. We had to promote foreign and national investment in oil, in other industries that were state-owned. How could change always implies pain? And to lessen the pain for the majority, there were some of the most advanced social programs at that time that later on were, taken by Brazil and by Mexico too.
Margarita, who is feeling that?
I have a different perspective on that. I mean, you want to change us from one day to the other into a free market economy when we have been a state economy throughout all the 20th century? I mean, you can't do that. And I think the problem was not that the change had to come, and we still haven't been able to have a market economy in some way that will let us to feed the population, the 30 million of Venezuelans that we are. But the problem was the way it was put out.
Right. And this is what tried to happen, is that the U.S. and big banks and their allies have tried to come in and force Venezuela to allow what they call, quote-unquote, foreign investment, when really what that is foreign corporations, big oil, to come in and take over and make the oil in Venezuela a commodity that doesn't benefit their people, but benefits big oil. And in exchange, they will allow certain things to happen that allow the Venezuelan economy to grow. and to become more beneficial. Basically, you'll be the well-paid slave. You'll be the house slave. You won't be the slave that's out in the sun picking the cotton. You'll be the one inside that's serving the tea. And that's what's basically trying to be said here. Now, I'll put the link to this down in the description, and you can watch all of it. It's about 48 minutes. But what they're trying to do, what Venezuela is trying to do, is break free. And they have been. And I'm telling you what, the reason they are trying to knock this guy out quick is because of this crypto. Pardon my computer here for a minute. Because if this thing takes off, and India is already mulling taking this in exchange for, they're going to sell them oil at a 30% discount if they pay in this petro crypto. So it's coming. It's absolutely coming. And this war is something that the U.S. right, the people that have wanted our country to return to a gold standard, return to a way of doing things that is not criminal, have wanted for a long time. And they're trying to do it down there. Don't believe the mainstream media on this. Like, share, subscribe.